What happens when a former U.S. president publicly humiliates a young African leader in front of the entire world and gets absolutely destroyed in response? This isn't just another political argument. This is the moment that redefined respect on the global stage, and you won't believe how it happened. We're talking about a confrontation so devastating, so perfectly executed, that it went viral with over 50 million views in just 24 hours. By the end of this story, you'll understand why this 34-year-old leader just schooled one of the most powerful men in the world, and why this moment changed international diplomacy forever. Stay with me because what you're about to hear will shock you. Picture this: the most exclusive gathering of world leaders on the planet. Davos, Switzerland. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over polished marble floors, while snow-capped Alps provide the backdrop through floor-to-ceiling windows. This is the World Economic Forum, where billion-dollar decisions are made and global power dynamics play out in real time. 60 nations have gathered for the most critical discussion of the year, with media crews positioning their cameras strategically, knowing that today's panels will shape international relations for months to come. The theme is economic sovereignty in a multipolar world, and it has drawn every major leader, each bringing their own agenda to the table. Outside, protesters hold signs about African exploitation, their voices barely audible through the thick glass. But inside, the air carries the weight of decisions that will affect millions of lives. This is where history gets made, and today, history is about to explode in the most unexpected way. The arrivals tell the whole story. Trump's motorcade stretches along the pristine Swiss streets like a parade of power, 12 vehicles complete with Secret Service detail and a media entourage that followed him from his private jet. President Macron's delegation arrives with similar fanfare, French flags adorning the lead vehicle as photographers capture every moment of choreographed authority. The Chinese representatives bring calculated precision, their disciplined formation speaking to methodical planning and substantial resources. Each entrance is designed for maximum impact, projecting strength and international significance. And then something completely different happens. A single modest sedan pulls up, and out steps a man in a simple olive green uniform with no excessive decorations, accompanied by just his foreign minister and one security aide. This is Ibrahim Traoré, and he's about to give the world a masterclass in authentic power. Meet Ibrahim Traoré, 34 years old, leader of Burkina Faso, and he's about to change everything you think you know about leadership. While other leaders arrived with massive security details and theatrical displays of wealth, Traoré brought authenticity. This isn't a man who inherited power through family connections or bought his way to the top through corporate influence. His people chose him because he actually serves them, not foreign interests or multinational corporations. In his modest hotel room that morning, Traoré reviews his notes one final time, knowing he's the youngest leader invited to address the forum's main panel on economic independence. His invitation surprised many Western diplomats who still viewed Burkina Faso as a minor player in global affairs, but they had no idea what kind of leader they were dealing with. Here's what makes this incredible. While Trump's team discusses message discipline and avoiding diplomatic incidents, while other delegations coordinate massive security details and media strategies, Traoré stands quietly by a window overlooking the mountains, completely calm and focused on the substance of what he wants to say. Think about a time when you felt underestimated because of your age, your background, or where you came from. That's exactly what's happening here, except the whole world is watching and the stakes couldn't be higher. European delegates exchange knowing glances in the corridors, their skepticism barely concealed behind diplomatic smiles. One ambassador mutters to his colleague, adjusting his expensive watch with practiced superiority. "He's younger than my son." They have no idea they're about to witness something that will redefine their understanding of leadership forever. But here's the thing about Traoré that nobody in that room understood yet. He carried with him wisdom that went far deeper than political training. Little did anyone know, he remembered his grandfather's words from childhood evenings under baobab trees in their village. When a man shows you who he is, thank him for his honesty, then show him who you are. This wasn't just about personal respect or political theater. This was about an entire continent's dignity on the world stage, and the young captain was ready to defend it. The main auditorium buzzes with nervous energy as hundreds of delegates settle into their seats, for what everyone expects to be a routine panel discussion. The moderator, a seasoned Swiss diplomat, announces with practiced neutrality, "Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to examine economic sovereignty in our rapidly changing global landscape." 5 leather chairs are arranged in a semicircle on the stage, each representing a different continent's approach to economic independence. Cameras from major networks focus on the panelists as they take their positions, the weight of international scrutiny palpable in the air. Trump dominates the center seat, his presence commanding attention even before he speaks a word. Ibrahim Traoré sits quietly to the far right, his calm composure creating a stark contrast to the theatrical positioning happening around him. The discussion begins predictably enough, with broad questions about trade partnerships and monetary policy, each panelist delivering carefully prepared talking points designed to avoid controversy. Trump's responses are characteristically bold, emphasizing American economic dominance and the benefits of aligning with Western financial systems. President Macron speaks eloquently about European integration and the importance of maintaining established international frameworks that have served the developed world well. The Chinese representative offers measured comments about mutual cooperation and shared prosperity through existing trade agreements. When the moderator turns to Traoré, the room's energy shifts subtly, as if the audience is preparing for something different, something less polished but potentially more authentic. His first response is brief but thoughtful, focusing on the importance of genuine partnerships rather than dependency relationships that have historically characterized North-South economic interactions. But here's where things start getting interesting. As the discussion progresses, Trump's body language becomes increasingly dismissive whenever African economic policies are mentioned. He interrupts twice when Traoré speaks about Burkina Faso's agricultural reforms, his gestures suggesting impatience with what he clearly views as minor concerns from a minor player. The former president's comments consistently return to themes of American leadership and the necessity of following proven Western models, as if there's only one way to achieve economic development. Other panelists maintain diplomatic courtesy, though subtle eye rolls and uncomfortable shifts reveal their own biases about who deserves to be taken seriously in these discussions. You can feel the tension building. The audience, largely composed of Western business leaders and politicians, seems more engaged when discussing familiar markets and traditional power structures. Journalists are starting to lean forward, sensing that something is brewing beneath the surface of diplomatic politeness. The stage is being set for a confrontation that will expose deep-seated condescension, and Traoré's responses are growing more pointed as he recognizes the pattern of dismissal. The moderator, trying to maintain control, poses what seems like a safe question about agricultural partnerships between developed and developing nations. Her voice carries the practiced neutrality of international diplomacy, but you can sense she's aware of the growing tension in the room. Trump leans forward in his chair, his expression shifting to one of barely concealed impatience as the discussion turns to African agricultural policies. The room falls silent, sensing that the former president is about to break diplomatic protocol in spectacular fashion. Camera operators instinctively adjust their focus, recognizing the moment when careful diplomacy gives way to raw confrontation. Even seasoned diplomats straighten in their seats, their training failing to prepare them for what's about to unfold. And then it happens. "Look, we need to be realistic here." Trump begins, his tone dismissive as he gestures broadly toward the audience. "We're talking about serious economic policy here, not some inexperienced African leaders playing dress-up in military uniforms." The words hang in the air like a physical blow, their impact reverberating through the stunned auditorium. Several delegates audibly gasp while others exchange horrified glances at the unprecedented breach of diplomatic courtesy. The Chinese representative's face remains impassive, but his hands visibly tighten on his chair's armrests. President Macron shifts uncomfortably, his diplomatic training warring with obvious embarrassment at his fellow panelists' behavior. The moderator's carefully maintained composure cracks for just a moment, her eyes widening at the direct personal attack that has just shattered every rule of international discourse. This is the moment that changes everything. Ibrahim Traoré's expression remains unchanged, though a slight tightening around his eyes reveals the impact of the insult that wasn't just directed at him, but at an entire continent. His hands rest calmly on his lap, betraying no sign of the anger that any reasonable person would feel after such public humiliation. His breathing remains steady, his military training evident in his ability to maintain composure under direct attack. Around the auditorium, African delegates and journalists lean forward, their faces reflecting a mixture of outrage and anticipation, knowing that this moment will either validate Trump's dismissal or shatter it completely. The silence stretches for what feels like an eternity, broken only by the mechanical whir of cameras capturing every nuance of this unprecedented moment. And then something extraordinary happens. Ibrahim Traoré closes his eyes for exactly 3 seconds, a gesture so subtle that only the closest cameras capture it. But in that brief moment, the auditorium's tension becomes almost unbearable as delegates wait to see how he will respond to such public humiliation. When he opens his eyes, there's a clarity there that hadn't existed before, a quiet fire that seems to illuminate the entire stage. He leans forward slightly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who has never needed to shout to be heard. "Thank you for that illuminating perspective," he begins, his tone so measured that it immediately commands attention from every corner of the auditorium. The deliberate pause after illuminating carries layers of meaning that resonate through the stunned silence, and his eyes remain fixed on Trump, not with anger, but with the steady gaze of someone who understands exactly what he's facing. Watch what he does next, because this is political brilliance unfolding in real time. I want to tell you about a conversation I had 3 weeks ago with a 70-year-old woman named Aminata in my country. Traoré continues, his voice gaining strength with each word. She had walked 15 kilometers to reach our town hall meeting, carrying her infant grandson on her back because she wanted to discuss rice production policies. When I asked her why she had made such a difficult journey, she looked at me with eyes that held more wisdom than most boardrooms. The room's energy shifts palpably as delegates begin to lean forward, drawn in by the unexpected intimacy of the story that's transforming this moment of confrontation into something deeper. "Captain," she said to me, "I wanted to see the young man who remembers that leadership is about serving people, not impressing foreigners." Her words reminded me that authentic leadership isn't measured by the size of your motorcade or the volume of your voice. It's measured by the trust of people who have nothing to gain from flattering you. Trump's confident smirk begins to fade as he realizes that his opponent isn't responding with anger or defensive justifications, but with something far more powerful: authentic human connection and moral authority. The Chinese representative nods slightly, recognizing the strategic brilliance of the approach, while President Macron's expression shows genuine interest for the first time. African delegates in the audience sit straighter, their faces reflecting pride and anticipation as they recognize their continent's dignity being defended with grace and wisdom. That woman, Mr. Trump, represents the kind of leadership experience that can't be learned in boardrooms or inherited through privilege. Traoré says, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. She has managed family resources through droughts and floods, negotiated community conflicts, and raised children who contribute to society rather than exploit it. Her inexperience includes decades of making life and death decisions with limited resources, something that builds character in ways that luxury and inherited wealth simply cannot. The audience is completely captivated now, recognizing they're witnessing something unprecedented in international diplomacy. When she calls me captain, she's not referring to a military rank, but to someone who has earned the right to guide others through genuine service. This is the kind of leadership that Africa offers to the world. Not the theater of power, but the substance of service. The room falls silent again, but this time it's the silence of recognition, not shock. But Traoré isn't finished, not even close. His voice takes on the weight of history as he shifts to address the broader audience, his gaze sweeping across the auditorium filled with representatives from former colonial powers. "Let me share some context that might help explain why your comment reveals more about historical blindness than African leadership," he says, his tone remaining respectful but firm. The young captain's words carry the accumulated pain of generations, though his delivery remains measured and dignified. Trump shifts uncomfortably in his seat, clearly unprepared for this level of historical analysis and moral authority coming from someone he thought he could easily dismiss. Camera operators tighten their focus, recognizing that this moment will be studied and quoted for years to come. For over a century, European powers extracted an estimated $152 trillion in resources from Africa, according to your own Western economists. Traoré continues, his facts delivered with the precision of someone who has done his homework. The uranium that powered France's nuclear program came from Niger. The gold that built London's financial district came from Ghana. The diamonds that adorned European royalty came from our soil. The historical record is devastating in its clarity, and you can see the discomfort spreading across European faces in the audience. Yet when African leaders seek to control their own resources, to build their own refineries, to add value to their own raw materials, they are labeled as inexperienced or anti-Western. This isn't inexperience speaking. It's the hard-earned wisdom of people who have watched their wealth fund other nations' development while their own children lack basic necessities. The auditorium falls into an uncomfortable silence as delegates confront truths that are rarely spoken in such forums. President Macron's face has gone pale, his diplomatic training struggling to process the direct challenge to France's historical narrative. Several European delegates exchange uneasy glances, their carefully maintained composure cracking under the weight of documented historical facts that can't be disputed or dismissed. The Chinese representative continues to nod slightly, recognizing both the accuracy of the claims and the strategic brilliance of the presentation. Trump's earlier confidence has completely evaporated, replaced by the defensive posture of someone who never expected to be challenged with such devastating effectiveness. So when you speak of inexperienced African leaders, you're actually describing people who have managed to maintain dignity and hope despite centuries of systematic exploitation. Traoré says, his voice rising slightly for the first time. We are the descendants of leaders who built universities in Timbuktu while Europe was still emerging from the Dark Ages, who created complex trade networks spanning continents, who developed agricultural techniques that sustained millions. Our inexperience includes managing the aftermath of artificial borders drawn by people who had never set foot on our soil, rebuilding societies shattered by slave trades, and creating stability despite inherited colonial chaos. The power of this historical education is undeniable, and even skeptical delegates are beginning to recognize the depth of knowledge and perspective they're witnessing. The real question isn't whether African leaders are experienced enough. It's whether the world is ready to acknowledge that experience and treat it with the respect it deserves. This knowledge, this resilience, this ability to create something from nothing, that's not inexperience. That's mastery born of necessity. The room is completely silent now, processing the weight of centuries of history that has just been laid bare with surgical precision. But the young captain still isn't done. He's about to deliver proof that will make his case undeniable. Let me tell you what inexperienced leadership has accomplished in Burkina Faso in just 3 years. Traoré says, his voice carrying the quiet pride of tangible achievement that can't be argued with or dismissed. We have increased local food production by 40% through community-based agricultural programs that prioritize traditional knowledge alongside modern techniques. Our literacy rate has improved by 15% through education initiatives that respect local languages while teaching global skills. We've built 200 new wells using local labor and materials, creating jobs while providing clean water to rural communities. These aren't theoretical policies or campaign promises. These are measurable results that transform lives. Most importantly, we've done this without taking a single loan from the World Bank or International Monetary Fund, proving that sustainable development doesn't require foreign debt that burdens future generations. The significance of this achievement resonates through the room like a thunderclap. These aren't theoretical policies debated in air-conditioned boardrooms by people who will never live with the consequences. They're real solutions implemented by people who understand their community's actual needs because they're part of those communities. He continues with specific examples that paint a picture of authentic governance. Our approach to governance prioritizes local solutions over imported models because we've learned that sustainable change comes from within, not from foreign consultants who fly in with cookie-cutter solutions. When we faced food shortages, we didn't import grain from abroad and create dependency. We taught farmers to diversify crops and improve soil health using methods their grandparents knew, but that had been dismissed by colonial education systems. When we needed better health care, We trained community health workers who understood local conditions and could communicate in local languages rather than building expensive hospitals that only served urban elites. The practical wisdom of this approach is undeniable. Our soldiers are recruited from local communities, not foreign mercenaries, because they fight to protect people they grew up with, people whose children play with their children. Every policy we implement is tested against one simple question. Does this serve our people, or does it serve foreign interests? The auditorium's atmosphere has completely transformed, with delegates now listening with genuine interest rather than polite obligation, recognizing they're receiving an education in effective governance that challenges everything they thought they knew about African leadership. But Traoré isn't finished making his case. What you call playing dress-up in military uniforms is actually the uniform of a leader who has never sent his people to die in foreign wars for someone else's economic interests. He says, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority that comes from authentic service. This uniform represents a commitment to defending our sovereignty, not projecting power abroad for resource access or geopolitical advantage. We've achieved food security, energy independence, and social stability without invading other countries or destabilizing entire regions for economic gain. The contrast with recent American and European military interventions is implicit but devastating. Our young people are choosing to stay and build their nation rather than fleeing to Europe as economic migrants because they see genuine opportunity and dignity at home. This is what experienced leadership looks like when it's accountable to the people it serves, rather than to foreign investors, military contractors, or multinational corporations whose interests rarely align with local development. The truth of this statement resonates powerfully through the auditorium. The world is watching Africa today not because we're asking for charity or foreign aid, but because we're demonstrating that another way is possible, that nations can develop without sacrificing their sovereignty or mortgaging their future to foreign creditors. And then, in a move that electrifies the entire room, Traoré stands slowly from his chair, his movement deliberate and commanding as the entire auditorium holds its breath in anticipation. The young captain's posture radiates quiet confidence as he prepares to deliver what everyone senses will be the defining moment of this encounter. His hands remain steady at his sides. No theatrical gestures needed to command the room's absolute attention. The silence is so complete that the sound of cameras clicking seems amplified, each shutter capturing a moment that will be remembered long after the forum ends. Even the Swiss moderator has given up any pretense of controlling the discussion, recognizing that she's witnessing something unprecedented in international diplomacy that will be studied for decades to come. Mr. Trump, your words today have done something remarkable. Traoré begins, his voice carrying the finality of a closing argument that will leave no room for doubt. They've perfectly illustrated the difference between leadership and theater. What comes next is surgical precision, not angry insults or emotional reactions, but documented facts about character and achievement that can't be disputed. You speak of experience, yet your experience includes bankrupting multiple businesses, defaulting on loans, and leaving contractors unpaid across multiple continents. Traoré continues, his tone remaining respectful but devastatingly factual. My experience includes feeding hungry children, providing clean water to communities that had been forgotten by their previous governments, and building schools without borrowing money we cannot repay, ensuring that education doesn't become another form of debt bondage. The contrast couldn't be more stark or more damaging. You measure success by the size of your bank account and the height of buildings that bear your name. I measure it by the number of mothers who can afford to send their children to school and the number of families who no longer go to bed hungry. This isn't political rhetoric. This is a fundamental difference in values and priorities. Your legacy includes dividing communities along racial and ethnic lines, exploiting differences for political gain, and leaving behind a trail of broken promises and unpaid debts. Mine includes bringing people together across tribal and religious lines to solve problems that affect their daily lives and building institutions that will serve future generations. The moral authority in his voice is undeniable. The difference between us isn't age or years in office. It's the difference between serving yourself and serving others. It's the difference between extractive leadership that takes value for personal gain and generative leadership that creates value for everyone. This is a lesson that no amount of inherited wealth, political connections, or media manipulation can teach. The auditorium erupts into scattered applause that quickly grows into a sustained ovation, with delegates from across the global South rising to their feet in recognition of what they've just witnessed. Trump's face has gone red, his usual composure completely shattered by the systematic dismantling of his credibility and moral authority. President Macron sits frozen, clearly calculating the political implications of being associated with such an embarrassing display of arrogance and ignorance. The Chinese representative is smiling slightly, obviously appreciating the strategic brilliance of Traoré's approach to the confrontation and perhaps taking notes for future diplomatic encounters. African delegates are beaming with pride, their faces reflecting the joy of seeing their continent's dignity defended on the world stage with such grace and power. Even some European delegates are applauding, their diplomatic training overridden by genuine admiration for the young leader's composure, wisdom, and moral clarity. But Traoré isn't finished. He has one final truth to deliver that will cement this moment in history. Dignity, Mr. Trump, is not something you can purchase with inherited wealth or demand through military might. He concludes, his final words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. It is earned through service to others, maintained through integrity in the face of temptation, and demonstrated through the courage to stand up for what is right, even when facing those who believe power gives them the right to diminish others. This is the essence of authentic leadership distilled into pure truth. The people of Burkina Faso didn't choose me because I promised them easy solutions or because I blamed their problems on foreigners or former colonial powers. They chose me because I promised to treat them with the respect that every human being deserves and to defend that respect against anyone who would challenge it, no matter how powerful they claim to be. The standing ovation that follows is not just for him, but for every leader who has ever been underestimated because of their age, their continent, their skin color, or their commitment to serving others rather than themselves. Today the world has seen the difference between authentic leadership and empty theater, between wisdom earned through service and arrogance inherited through privilege, between the future we're building and the past we're leaving behind. The applause continues for several minutes, a recognition that something fundamental has shifted in international discourse. Within minutes of Traoré's final words, smartphones across the auditorium are buzzing with notifications as clips of the exchange begin circulating on social media platforms worldwide. The hashtag Traoré response is trending globally before the panel has even concluded, with millions of users sharing video segments of the young captain's masterful dismantling of Trump's insult. News outlets from CNN to BBC are already preparing breaking news segments, their producers recognizing that they've witnessed a defining moment in international relations that will dominate headlines for days to come. African social media explodes with pride and celebration, users from Cape Town to Cairo sharing the footage with commentary in dozens of languages. Many noting that this is the first time they've seen their continent defended with such dignity and factual precision on the global stage. The Swiss Forum's official live stream crashes twice from the overwhelming traffic as viewers worldwide rewind and replay the confrontation, trying to capture and share the most devastating moments. By evening, the exchange has been viewed over 50 million times across all platforms, making it one of the most viral political moments in recent history, competing with presidential debates and major international incidents for global attention. International news anchors struggle to find adequate words to describe what they've witnessed, many calling it the most significant diplomatic moment of the decade, with several noting that it represents a generational shift in how global power dynamics are being challenged. "We have just seen a masterclass in dignity under fire," declares a BBC correspondent, her voice filled with genuine awe at the young leader's composure and strategic brilliance. French media outlets are particularly shaken, with several prominent journalists acknowledging that they had underestimated African leadership for too long and pledging to provide more comprehensive coverage of the continent's political developments. American networks find themselves in the awkward position of having to explain why their former president had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by someone they had barely covered in their international reporting. Chinese state media praises Traoré's strategic brilliance and moral authority, while Russian outlets celebrate what they see as the humiliation of Western arrogance and the emergence of truly independent leadership from the global South. Even conservative American commentators are forced to admit that Trump had been completely outclassed by the young African leader, with some noting that this represents exactly the kind of authentic leadership that American politics desperately needs. The cultural impact spreads far beyond news coverage and political commentary. University students from Harvard to Oxford organize viewing parties to watch and analyze the exchange, with political science professors incorporating the footage into their curriculum within days, using it as a case study in effective communication under pressure and the power of moral authority in international relations. The moment becomes required viewing in diplomatic academies worldwide, studied as an example of how to maintain dignity while delivering devastating political responses, and how to transform moments of disrespect into opportunities for education and empowerment. African universities see enrollment spikes in political science and international relations programs, with students citing Traoré's performance as inspiration for their career choices and proof that African voices can command respect on the global stage. Young activists across the global South adopt phrases from his speech as rallying cries for their own social justice movements, particularly his words about the difference between serving yourself and serving others. The exchange is translated into over 40 languages, spreading far beyond political circles into popular culture and everyday conversation, with phrases like mastery born of necessity and the difference between leadership and theater becoming part of the global vocabulary. Social media influencers, artists, and writers begin incorporating references to the moment into their work, cementing its place in contemporary culture as a defining example of how to respond to disrespect with grace and power. The long-term diplomatic implications are immediate and profound, with several European leaders quietly reaching out to establish direct communication channels with Traoré's administration, recognizing that they can no longer afford to ignore or dismiss African leadership. The African Union receives unprecedented attention and respect in subsequent international forums, with other world leaders careful to avoid similar embarrassments and more willing to engage seriously with African perspectives on global issues. Trump's political allies begin to distance themselves from his comments, recognizing the damage to America's international reputation and their own political prospects in an increasingly multipolar world where respect must be earned rather than demanded. Investment inquiries about Burkina Faso and other African nations increase dramatically as business leaders recognize the continent's potential for stable, authentic leadership that prioritizes long-term development over short-term extraction. The moment has fundamentally shifted global perceptions of African leadership, replacing centuries of condescension with newfound respect and curiosity about what the continent has to offer the world. What can we learn from this extraordinary moment that will stay with us long after the headlines fade? First, authentic leadership always beats theatrical leadership because people can sense the difference between someone who serves others and someone who serves only themselves. Traoré wasn't just responding emotionally to an insult. He was prepared with facts, with history, with concrete achievements that couldn't be disputed or dismissed. When someone tries to diminish you, you have a choice. You can respond with anger and defensiveness, or you can respond with dignity and truth that reveals more about their character than yours. Traoré knew his worth because he knew his achievements, he knew his people's history, and he understood that confidence comes from knowledge and authentic accomplishment, not from inherited privilege or media manipulation. Notice how he structured his response. Personal story to create human connection, historical context to establish credibility and expose hypocrisy, concrete achievements to prove effectiveness, and personal contrast to reveal character. Whether you're in a boardroom, a classroom, or any situation where someone tries to diminish you based on assumptions about your age, background, or capabilities, these principles apply universally. This moment represents something much bigger than one confrontation between two leaders. It's about changing power dynamics that have existed for centuries, challenging assumptions that have gone unquestioned for too long, and demanding respect that should never have been withheld in the first place. It's about the ripple effect that happens when one person has the courage to stand up with dignity and truth, inspiring millions of others who have faced similar dismissal and disrespect. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just defend his own dignity that day in Davos. He elevated an entire continent standing on the world stage, proving that truth and authenticity can triumph over arrogance and inherited privilege every single time. He showed the world that real leadership isn't about the size of your motorcade, the volume of your voice, or the balance in your bank account. It's about the trust of people who have nothing to gain from flattering you, the courage to stand up for what's right even when facing powerful opponents, and the wisdom to respond to hatred with dignity rather than sinking to the same level. The next time someone underestimates you because of where you come from, how old you are, or what they think they know about your capabilities, remember this moment. Remember that your worth isn't determined by others' opinions or prejudices, but by the authenticity of your service and the integrity of your character. What assumptions do people make about you? What underestimation have you faced in your own life? How will you respond with dignity and truth the next time someone tries to diminish you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story matters just as much as this one. If this story inspired you, there are countless other examples of leaders who have challenged global perceptions and celebrated authentic leadership over empty theater. Subscribe to hear more of these stories that remind us what real leadership looks like in a world that desperately needs it. Share this video with someone who needs to see what happens when dignity meets arrogance, when preparation meets prejudice, when authentic service meets inherited privilege. Remember, dignity isn't given by others, it's claimed by you through your actions, your integrity, and your courage to stand up for what's right, no matter who's watching or how powerful they claim to be. This is the lesson that a 34-year-old leader from Burkina Faso taught the entire world, and it's a lesson we should never forget.